This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
Next on the 5 o'clock report.
Sweet land of liberty.
I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values.
Now, let's go to the newsroom.
Royal pomp and circumstance. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Webster. A royal White House welcome for British royalty. A parade and an F-35 flyover, part of the festivities offered up to Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla today by President Trump.
American patriots today can sing "My Country 'Tis of Thee," sweet land of liberty, only because our colonial ancestors first sang "God Save the King."
And the current King, Charles, gave an afternoon address to a joint session of Congress.
I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world. And
tomorrow, the royal couple will pay a call on New York City. Legal troubles for a couple of former federal officials. CBS's Jake Rosen says one involves a new indictment of former FBI Director James Comey over a 2025 Instagram post showing seashells arranged to form 8647.
We don't know the specific charges. It's certainly possible there could be some charge related to an interstate threat against a public official like President Trump, although the language in that post of the 8647, while it's rather specific when you put it in the context, could be perceived as rather vague in a court of law.
Also today, former NIH senior advisor David Morin's indicted in what the DOJ says was a scheme to keep public records away from Freedom of Information Act requests after a House subcommittee released evidence of him using his personal email to discuss NIH grants with the Wuhan biolab linked to the COVID pandemic. Among the charges he faces, conspiracy against the United States. The FBI, along with state and local law enforcement, also got an early start today raiding Minneapolis child care centers suspected of widespread fraud.
This is an operation that occurred overnight, so children were not present, but they were seen at 22 court-authorized searches at daycares across the Minneapolis area.
CBS's Nicole Skenga. A man who made an assassination attempt on former President Reagan says the Washington Hilton should stop holding events at the hotel. John Hinckley Jr. shot former President Reagan outside the Washington Hilton in 1981. The same location a shooting occurred during the White House Correspondents Association dinner over the weekend. The failed assassin, like several journalists and other dinner attendees, says the hotel's security was lax, noting how he was able to sneak into a crowd of reporters without being checked by Secret Service agents. A battle of tech titans in court as Elon Musk sues a co-founder over the path of an AI company that began as a nonprofit.
Musk says that he was basically tricked into believing OpenAI, the company he started with now CEO Sam Altman in 2015, would always be a nonprofit company. We're expecting to hear from Musk, Altman, and other major players like Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella.
Kelly Saberi with Fox Business. A round of severe weather taking aim at the south and the southern plains today. A corridor that spans from the Big Bend of Texas through Kentucky under threat today as they watch for possible tornadoes. NBC's Shaquille Brewster looked at yesterday's storm damage in Germantown, Illinois.
It's a scene that you're seeing throughout this neighborhood. Street closed off because of debris, but neighbors now doing what they can to cut down those tree limbs and to get them out and clear a path. And that also shows why you're seeing about several hundred thousands of people across the Midwest without power.
Yeah, still tens of thousands in the dark in Arkansas, Missouri, Indiana, and Michigan. The owners of Camp Mystic in the Texas Hill Country responding to claims that they did not do enough to save the 27 kids and counselors who were killed in last year's flood. State investigator Casey Garrett.
You had so much time to get all of those girls somewhere other than those deadly cabins.
Today, families of the victims of that Christian camp tragedy testifying before a state legislative committee. The camp's Ed Eastland, though, says his dad was frantically tracking the storm that night.
He looked upstream of us, and those river gauge sensors were offline, so we could only rely on the gauges downstream of us. I do believe that all of our actions that morning were based on reason from the knowledge we had from previous floods and in the moment.
Eastland says he thinks about the flood every day. Those southeast wildfires are continuing. The National Park Service and Miami-Dade County Fire Rescue battling a brush fire in the West Miami-Dade portion of the Everglades. This airboat driver says he's been told to evacuate because the flames are getting too close.
You could hear the burning, actually. You could hear the crackling. You could hear how dry it is out there. I mean, one of the driest droughts in 25 years.
The conditions are so dry that some areas are no longer accessible by airboat, and South Florida's rainy season is still weeks away. Still to come here on the 5 o'clock report, a recap of our top regional stories and highlights from today's Mission Pulse feature. Checking the stories making news where you live across New York and Pennsylvania. For the 7th time since the April 1st deadline came and went, state lawmakers approving another budget extender in Albany. This latest one will make sure the Empire State can pay its bills through this Thursday. Lawmakers believe it is likely they'll need at least one more beyond that before they can finally work out an agreement with Governor Kathy Hochul. Here's Hochul's take.
I do commend the legislative leaders for working closely with me over these long, difficult months to bring the ideas and recommendations from the legislature forward. They've done that, and now we're trying to come together to an agreement. We'll get there. We'll get there.
The budget holdup is holding up a lot of folks in various ways. For example, the superintendent of the Rochester City School District addressing concerns of teachers, parents, and students about possible cuts to programs as part of a new fiscal plan, as well as the elimination of some teaching and social work positions. Superintendent Eric J. Rosser says creating that budget's been tough, and final decisions can't be made until a new state budget is passed. The district is expecting to vote on its budget May 5th. New York State is now part of a coalition of states going after prediction market platforms. Those are online companies that allow users to bet on anything from politics to sporting events.
Right now, it's kind of seen as the more contemporary sort of trend within the gambling world because it's allowing people to bet on things that have not really been allowed in the past.
Problem gambling expert Robin Singh tells Spectrum News prediction markets are set up to look like financial websites, not betting platforms.
You're not actually submitting a bet. All of these sort of like questions and things, whether or not they're going to happen, they're called markets on the platform. We find that nomenclature is a little bit of a sneaky way of getting around calling it a bet.
A proposal in the state legislature authorizes the state attorney general to set rules and regulations on prediction market platforms. A pro-family group in Pennsylvania launching a statewide prayer campaign. More from Family Life's Bob Price.
The Pennsylvania Family Institute is sponsoring a series of prayer events starting tonight in Stroudsburg in advance of next week's National Day of Prayer. The Pray for PA Tour is an initiative of PFI's Church Ambassador Network, which helps foster relationships between the church and government leaders. Christian leaders will gather next Wednesday in the Capitol Rotunda in Harrisburg to pray for state officials. The 74th annual National Day of Prayer is next Thursday, with prayer rallies planned in over 30,000 communities nationwide. Bob Price, Family Life News.
Thank you, Bob. Well, with the weather getting warmer, public health officials are warning about tick-borne illnesses. Emergency room visits for tick bites are at their highest level in New York since 2017. Chuck Bartlett with the Erie County New York Parks Department says the rise in tick bites is directly connected to an increase in acorns.
What that does is it increases the food source for primarily small mammals. We had the large mouse population, so they're more likely to feed on a mouse. Once a mouse is infected with Lyme disease, for every tick that feeds off of the mouse after that will have Lyme. All the larvae last summer got infected with Lyme, hunkered down, and those are the ones that are starting to come out now.
Bartlett says the number of young ticks infected with Lyme disease has doubled in recent years. He recommends anyone who spends any amount of time outdoors needs to check themselves and their clothing for ticks frequently. You should report any symptoms of Lyme disease, fever, rash, fatigue, and joint pain to your doctor ASAP. You're listening to the 5 o'clock report on Family Life.
This is Mission Pulse. We spotlight ministries making a difference where you live, across the country, and around the world. This week, we're spotlighting Dr. Douglas Small with Prayer at the Heart. You are launching 50 days of prayer, and you've invited 1 million Christians to pray for 1 million unbelievers for the 50 days between Passover, which started on April 5th, through Pentecost on May 24th. Tell me more.
We've not married prayer and evangelism. It is the only way to really change the nation. Families are very fragile. 43% of our children, when they're born, the father is already gone. We're so polarized politically. It took a great awakening to give this nation birth, and now we need one to save it.
Christian researcher George Barna documented a crisis of faith and hope in America, and in his study found only 6% of American adults hold a biblical worldview. 58% of Americans reject the notion of absolute right and wrong, and fewer than 1 in 4 American adults attend church weekly. What's your response to that study?
I think he's right. The attendance probably prior to COVID was only 17 to 18% of the population, and now it's probably hugging around 15%, with 23 to 25% being in church once a quarter. That's appalling. We're losing Christianity. We're losing our faith. 12% of youth pastors have a biblical worldview. About 13% of children's pastors have a biblical worldview. So we're somehow disconnecting faith from its roots, from its biblical roots.
How does the 50 days of prayer work? And what is the online prayer wall?
The call was to mobilize as many as 1 million people to pray for 50 days to see 1 million people come to Christ. That's been our goal. And if we don't see that happen by Pentecost Sunday, our goal is to extend that through the year, because that will be twice as many as all denominations are now seeing come to Christ in the course of a year. The prayer wall is every state taking an hour of prayer during the week to pray. So Monday through Friday, different leaders praying in their state.
You've created a 68-page, 50-day prayer guide. What is inside, and where can people find it?
It's kind of a guide to the whole 50-day experience. You can go to prayerattheheart.org, and you can look at the resources tab. You'll find short videos telling you this is what you could do yourself. You'll find videos saying to pastors, this is what you could do to call your church to prayer and evangelism. And you'll find this 50-day prayer guide. And there's a devotion for every day. There's a state featured every day. There's an unreached people group in America every day. There is a scripture every day and a short devotional that moves you to consider your privilege of praying somebody open to hear the gospel and know the love of God. It's really not bound to time. Anyone can use it any time as a way of waking up their heart to lost people around them. You know, it may well be that we are not post-Christian. Despite the stats that you read earlier, this young generation has never really heard the story. They've never really heard a balanced gospel presentation. They've never heard creationism. Only 1% of colleges or universities allow that voice to go forth. But what if we are not post-Christian? What if we're pre-Christian? What if we have a generation slightly more than Gen Z are going to church than my generation, the baby boomers? I think we may be on the cusp of seeing something extraordinary happen, but I think we have to act, and that is in holy, desperate, united prayer.
Thank you, Sarah. That's Dr. Douglas Small with the 50 Days of Prayer campaign. You can hear the entire feature and all of our Family Life original news features at Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, and FamilyLife.org. This is the 5 o'clock report on Family Life.
What if a church had to tell people to stop giving? It actually happened in the Bible. Hi, I'm Rob West with a Faith and Finance Minute. In Exodus 36, the Israelites were bringing offerings to build the tabernacle, the place where God's presence would dwell among them. Day after day, the people brought gold, silver, fabric, and other materials for the work. But eventually, the craftsmen came to Moses with surprising news. The people were bringing far more than was needed. So Moses sent out a message across the camp, no more offerings. It's one of the most remarkable moments of generosity in Scripture. When hearts are stirred by gratitude for what God has done, giving can become contagious. And when a community responds with joyful generosity, we often discover there's more than enough to accomplish His work. Manage your finances wisely with the easy-to-use FaithFi app. Download FaithFi, Faith and Finance from your app store, or learn more at faithfi.com.
Thanks, Rob. Finally at 5, talk about baby on board. On a recent Delta Airlines flight from Atlanta to Portland, Oregon, the passenger list grew from 153 to 154 before they got there.
The baby has been delivered on the aircraft, so they're going to be coming in with the baby delivered.
That's part of the radio call from Delta Flight 478 shortly before the Boeing 737 touched down at Portland International after that extra passenger came into the world while high above it. Ashley Blair, 38 weeks pregnant, was flying to Oregon to be with her mom for the birth, but the baby had her own schedule to keep, mom going into labor about a half hour before landing. Thankfully, also on board, a nurse and not one but 2 paramedics. 3 pushes later, out came 5.5-pound Brielle Renee Blair just before wheels down. There wasn't an emergency obstetrical kit on board, so the nurse and medics improvised, tying off the umbilical cord with a shoelace from one of the flight attendants. A waiting ambulance crew met the plane to take mother and daughter to the hospital to get checked out. All was fine. Brielle, well, it's a lovely name, but at that point I might have had to change it to Sky. And that's the world we live in for Tuesday, April 28th, 2026. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Mark Webster, Family Life News.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.